Welcome to today's webinar, Revolutionizing HIPO Programs. My name is Jack Zenger. I'm joined today by two other colleagues from our firm, Joe Folkman, co-founder of the organization, globally recognized as a leader in the field of psychometrics, leadership, and change. We're also joined today by Tracy Consolini, one of our regional vice presidents. Tracy, kind of say hi and wave your hand so they'll know who they're talking to.
Hello,
Tracy's
everyone.
an extremely knowledgeable colleague, and if you'll please type in any questions you have or requests for further information, you're in very, very good hands with Tracy Consolini. So, Joe, talk about today's objectives.
Well, we're excited to be here and talking about HIPOs today. And to start with, we want to expand your thinking about high potential programs, and are they working? What works? What doesn't work? Why are we doing them? Maybe give you some ideas about some new ways to think about them. What are the advantages and possible disadvantages of HIPO programs? What are the characteristics that are the most effective HIPO programs use? How to emphasize potential over current performance. We're going to talk a lot about this because one of the interesting things is that oftentimes when people have a HIPO program, the high potentials are not in there. It's not as good as we think it is. And then we're going to review some recent research we've done on some key competencies that are rated as highly important, but also what we call differentiating behaviors. And we're going to share that with you. And I think that'll be interesting because it's like, when people are really good as a HIPO, how do they stand out? So the definition of a HIPO, perceived as having the ability to become a senior leader, and usually assumed to be in the top 5%. Now, Jack, we're gonna really focus on this one a lot because our data, when we've collected data from 3 organizations that are using high potential programs, we've measured the effectiveness of their leaders. What we find across those 3 programs is that only 22% of those leaders are in the top quartile, not the top 5%, the top quartile, the top 25%. And so, boy, we are missing that a long ways as we do the research and research the effectiveness of leaders. Again, another characteristic is keen intellect, strong values, good interpersonal skills, high motivation and for achievement. And that's an interesting thing that we'll address. And then also good cultural fit. They fit the organization. They're a fit. So, Jack, tell us a little bit more about high potential programs.
Yeah, so some organizations create these high potential programs, which you could define as being a major organizational initiative that's really focused on finding these people, developing them, retaining them, and kind of accelerating their careers within the organization. So the goal of these programs is basically to prepare these individuals for the kind of potential that they might have for senior roles going forward in the company. Now, we begin by posing a big question. And the big question is, should you initiate a HIPO program or not? And we would submit to you that there are 2 big alternative choices. And option 1 is, create a HIPO program, because that allows you to focus your development activities and resources on those few people that you deem to be the most likely ones to become your future senior leaders. And this makes eminent sense if your resources are limited. There's obviously strong logic for doing just that. On the other hand, the second option is that you have a broad scale development for leadership for all leaders in the organization. It's much more broad, it's much more encompassing. And our data confirms that development of leaders on a broad scale not only increases the performance of that participant, but that in turn kind of spills down and cascades onto their direct reports. But it also kind of radiates out in multiple directions and elevates the level of leadership effectiveness in the entire organization. And next month, we're going to be talking to you about a little more detail, but the expression of this really shows up in two major studies that we've done. One over a 16-year period with a large, very highly respected university. And without getting into a lot of detail, the average participant that came into their program in the years 2009 through 2012 had an overall leadership effectiveness score as measured by a 360-degree feedback instrument that was being compared to over 1.5 million of these. Anyway, their average score of their participants in those early years was at the 57th percentile. In the year 2021 to 2024, the average leadership effectiveness score of the incoming participants had jumped to the 73rd percentile. So obviously there was a major organization-wide improvement in leadership effectiveness over that 16-year time period. We replicated that study in a large insurance company. This one, a 9-year period of time. You can see here the 3-year period from 15 through 2017. You compare those scores, which were interestingly enough, just 1 point difference than the university scores. But they were, yeah, I mean, they were above average. So this was a well-managed organization. But 9 years later, you see that the average incoming scores had again elevated up into the higher than the 70th percentile. So the point being that the advantages of a broad scale development process is that it seems to radiate out and cover the entire organization. And we think that that creates for you a very interesting choice point. Do you focus on a narrow group, or do you focus on the broader group in the organization? Joe? Well, so there are some key questions that we think we'll try to answer with you. One is, how do you determine which employees have high potential? The second big question is, exactly who should be making that decision? Third question is, should you inform the participants that they are in the high potential group? And let's be clear, we're talking about, should you inform the participants, not do you inform the entire organization and call out who is in and who's out, but should you tell the participants who have been selected that they are part of this group? And then finally, the last question that we'll focus on, what are the best practices for helping those individual employees truly elevate their potential? So we're going to ask you this question. Who do you think should decide who is a high potential employee? We're going to give you 5 choices. First one is the senior executives nominate people within their sphere of influence. And it's their choice about, they know somebody who's either reporting to them or 2 or 3 levels below them, and they nominate them to be participants in the program. Secondly, that they do this not alone, but that they collectively get together and discuss who should be included. And so it's a group decision. The third possibility is that you involve the human resources function, probably in larger organizations, specifically someone from the leadership and learning and development group, to join with the senior executives who then collaboratively make that choice. The fourth one is that HR or the leadership development group utilizes objective assessments. And we're thinking specifically of a 360-degree feedback process that would poll the prospective participants' colleagues to get their opinion about, is this person really an individual who could elevate himself or herself to a more senior level in the organization? You know, that goes back many, many decades to the military, who discovered that the best way to choose future officers was not to talk to some general above, but to talk to the people out on the firing line and the other new recruits who would make the best leader. So that's the fourth choice. And then the last option we're going to ask you to think about is there are organizations who have believed in kind of the walk-on process, that people should be able to self-nominate themselves if they're motivated, if they've got high aspirations. Should they kind of be able to raise their hands, and obviously they would need to be screened and vetted, but do you encourage, you know, self-nomination? So those are your 5 choices. We would appreciate you weighing in and choosing. What's your first choice? What would you focus your effort?
Jack, we've got a good sample of responses to the poll
Okay, let's see
already.
what people are saying. What's your guess, Joe?
Well, I don't think many people are going to say self-nomination, but what's interesting is the HR and senior executives collaborate to make the choice, gets 51% of the votes there. The second highest is the HR utilizes assessments from prospective folks. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, what is interesting is that probably historically, it's the first option that was the most prevalent method for people being selected for the HIPO program.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that only 7% of our participants on today's webinar think that that's the best idea. Okay.
And you wonder, that senior leader just doesn't know that many people. And so it's like, oh, have you impressed the CEO lately?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, let's jump on another issue here. And we looked at some studies done on satisfaction with HIPO programs. The first study came from DDI, and it's a 2023 global leadership forecast. And about 40 to 50% of organizations express satisfaction with HIPO programs. So it's not 100%, but you know, it's 40 to 50%. Corporate Executive Board, they did a study on to show how many HIPO participants are dissatisfied, and about 50% were dropping out of programs that they were dissatisfied and decided to drop out. Burson by Deloitte, they came back with a report that only 15 to 20% of organizations consider their HIPO programs as highly effective. So does that surprise you, Jack? It's kind of mixed data, but it doesn't look like, you know, we figured that out completely.
Yeah, it certainly expresses the dissatisfaction of the participants themselves and also the corporate people who are kind of managing these programs. Nobody seems to be extremely happy with what's happening.
Right. It's like, it's not very good. We got interested because what we know is that immediate supervisor is going to have whether you involve them or not. I mean, but you typically, that immediate manager is going to say, my direct report's a wizard, or he's a jerk. I don't know. But that immediate manager tends to have a fair amount of influence. Now, here's the problem. When we compare in the immediate manager's rating of effectiveness on a 360 to all other raters, what we find is 48% of the time they overrate people, and 52% of the time the underrate, which is like, well, okay, it's a crapshoot, you know. Yeah, half of the time the manager thinks that that direct report is better than they really are, or half of the time they think they're a bum and they're really a brilliant. So relying on or giving that manager a lot of influence in the process could be a real mistake. I mean, and we're going to talk about that more as with the data. So as you think about how high potential candidates should be chosen, it's dangerous to rely primarily on just the past performance. If you do a good job and you're successful in your last position, the word goes out, you're brilliant. And sometimes you're successful because somebody else laid the tracks or you just got an easy job or whatever. But, you know, it's not the best predictor of high potential. And the failures come because individuals lack ability, they don't learn from their experience, they aspire to leadership or they don't aspire to leadership with greater responsibilities. They don't want to be an executive. They're not committed to the organization. They're thinking about leaving, and so you waste money, or they don't fit well into the organization's culture. And so our point of view is the emphasis must shift away from past performance to better predictors of future performance. Jack, talk about that.
Yeah, so just in sum, it's clear that we have a strong point of view about the selection process. We strongly believe that the process that relies solely on only one executive's opinion has high error potential. We obviously think that there's an improvement when you are able to have group decisions where a group of people make that decision. But we're happy to see that you also agree, and the majority were in favor of combining the opinions of the leaders with more objective assessments about their defined behaviors that further improves the accuracy of this prediction. So one more poll we're going to ask you to participate in. Should employees be informed that they are considered high potential by their organization? And we'd just really be intrigued by your response. Yes, no, sometimes. Weigh in if you would quickly.
Wow, this is really interesting, Jack. And what's your guess? The majority do not inform? Is that what your guess is?
Yeah, my guess, well, my guess is that people think that they probably, you can make arguments on both sides of this case, obviously, but yeah. I suspect most will say no. But that will let's find out. So let's show the data.
This is a landslide.
Should employees be informed? So the should question, ought they to be informed? The answer is that three-fourths of you thought the answer is yes. And you know, the answer, those who answered no, I'm guessing would say, oh, this creates sort of an elitist, snobbish kind of attitude. They think they can coast, you know, so there are some downsides to it, but there obviously are some upsides. People, if they are told that they're part of this HIPO program, they feel that they've been appreciated, recognized, respected. It's flattering. It's motivating to many people, and so I can really see why the answer that many would give to that question is yes. Let's look at some data that we have collected about that, Joe.
Well, as we're going to show you, so here's what we had. You know, the telling versus not telling. And there's a 2010 study that suggested 72% of companies do not tell employees they have been labeled as high potential. And then there's another study in 2019 that said 54% of companies communicate high potential identification to employees. suggesting a slight increase in the transparency over the past decade. 2021 study said that 63% of organizations do not explicitly tell employees they have been identified as high potentials. It's all over the board.
Yeah, people are clearly still kind of grappling with the pluses and minuses of doing this.
And I think about the supervisors sometimes when they find an organization, when they find employees thinking about quitting, they say, "Hey, by the way, I shouldn't tell you this, but you're in the high potential program." Whether they are or not is to be seen, right?
Right, right.
We want to share some research with you, and there are really two. We merged two different data sets. One data set was 26 high potential executives, right? They were all told that they were high potential, and we had data on them, and then we administered and really collected 360 data on all 26. So the second study, we looked at 1,547 leaders from three management levels, and that they were separated out. They were considered high potential, but they were part of a group of 4,925 leaders. So that's the data set. And we identified two things. We looked at which competencies for this group were considered most important for them to do well, to be successful. And then we looked at what we call a differentiation behavior, a behavior, what separates the high potential group from the average employee? What characteristics really identified the best leaders? Now, let me show you the results of two studies. So the first study looked at importance rankings, and these are the 9 competencies that were viewed as being the most important competencies for a person to do well, to be successful in their current job. Communicates, solves problems, strategic perspective, collaboration and teamwork, inspires and motivates, strives for results, displays integrity and honesty, builds relationships, innovates. So those 9 were the highest rated, and people said these are the most important, and that makes some sense. The second study we did is we looked at just those people, those leaders who were rated in the top quartile, the best of the best, top quartile leaders that were high potentials. And so the question here is, what are the characteristics that show the biggest differences for high potential leaders that are really the most effective? And what we found is, and these were the same. There was 2 that were different. We identified eight competencies, and these are the 8 that are the most differentiating. That if a leader did these well, it really helped them stand out, and their performance to stand out significantly. And so, Jack, we're going to talk about these 8, and I'll start with communicates powerfully. This is the easiest competency to improve. We found that more people can improve this competency if they just work on it, but people are just kind of lazy about this. They don't pay as much attention to it as they ought to. If they did, they would be much better. And just keeping people informed has a significant positive effect on your overall perceived effectiveness. And as you look at that, what you see is the difference between the average leaders and the top quartile leaders. Huge difference in the ratings on communicates powerfully. So this is an easy competency to improve in. And if you're looking for low-hanging fruit, this is it. So if you're a better communicator, this could really help you.
So the second of the differentiating behaviors that differentiated the best from the average and not so good was problem solving. Certainly one of the valued behaviors of a leader is his or her ability to discover problems and to then engage in and implement solutions. Strong problem solvers just simply make better decisions. And so there's problem avoiders and problem solvers. And many of us have worked in our careers for leaders who were problem avoiders. They shrugged their shoulders. They only reacted when they had to. They avoided making decisions, didn't think things through, and didn't realize the consequences of not doing anything. And in contrast to people who were really perceived as good problem solvers, who were much more proactive, made decisions quickly, and they had that wonderful ability to anticipate outcomes and just jump in and resolve issues.
That's a good one. The third one was strategic perspective. And this is a consistent differentiator of those in senior levels compared to other competencies. You know, we know that people that have a strategic perspective, that keep people focused on the future, what's going to happen, where are we going, how are we going to get there, that really differentiates leaders, and it makes a huge difference. Now, one of the problems that people have with strategic perspective is that oftentimes early on in your career, you're not in a job where people really give you strategic information or expect you to form the strategy. So it's like it's difficult to develop this skill before you're put in a position where you're expected to use the skill. So this is critical. The other interesting thing we found on this one, Jack, is we found that men were rated significantly as better on this skill than women. And we think that's an issue for women also, that they need to be a little more strategic to get those promotions to a higher level. That was fascinating.
Okay, the next differentiator was this ability to be collaborative, to function as a team player, to reach out to others who work around you and to work effectively with them, to tackle projects and tasks that just absolutely demand cooperation rather than competition. And this ability to kind of be cooperative, collaborative, is just one of those truly important and differentiating behaviors, which then allows the team that they work with to operate with greater harmony and to integrate better with all the rest of the departments inside their organization.
You know, Jack, so many people come out of school being competitive, not cooperative, and they learn that skill in school. The next one was inspires and motivates others. Now, if you think about two competencies, drive for results, which we call push, and inspires and motivates others, which we call pull, 72% of leaders are better at push than pull. Only 22% of leaders are better at pull. This is a differentiating competency because when we look at the 19 competency, this one is rated the lowest of all the competencies that we measure. And yet, when we ask people what's most important, this is the most important. So the ability to inspire is different from the ability to push. And the best leaders do both. They push and pull. So this is a really critical competency. Learning to do this can really help you stand out as a leader. And really, this is the characteristic of a high potential that you want to see.
The next one probably comes as no surprise. What you value very much in a senior leader is her ability to kind of have the initiative to bring about change. You look for people who are seeking constantly to make things better, and their willingness to accept new duties and responsibilities if it means their ability to make things better. And the person who is always looking for, is there a better way? Is there an improved process? Is there new technology that can address this issue? And who has the courage to make the changes when when the opportunity arises. And so this willingness to kind of champion change, to look about and see how can things be, what are the trends that are happening, what are the potential problems I'm seeing, and to jump on them early. That differentiates the best and the leaders with the highest potential.
Another critical competency is displaying honesty and integrity, and nobody doubts that. What's interesting about this competency is there is almost no opportunity to just slide a little bit on this. Leaders who just miss this by a bit, or just don't do it exactly right, end up really in trouble. And it's the highest rated competency in our data, but it is critical that leaders be squeaky clean on this and never compromise, because kind of sliding a little bit of this can really damage your career.
Yeah, and the final differentiating characteristic we found was taking initiative. So the best leaders have their fingerprints all over change. They make things happen. This phrase, get her done. They're very driven for high performance. They love to kind of make a to-do list and cross things off. They thrive on kind of exceeding the expectations that people have for them in their position. And they're not prone to kind of wait around for somebody else to tell them. They're the people who look around and see what needs to be done and just jump in and do it. And those are the behaviors that really differentiate the best and highest potential leaders.
And by the way, Jack, since we need equal talk time here on this, women tend to be significantly better at this than men. So,
and that's fascinating, isn't it? That yes. Their development, their training has had them juggle things, a number of things simultaneously. Many women, leave work and go home and are very much more responsible for keeping the house and preparing the meals and taking care of the kids. They are better at taking initiative. Yeah.
I like that last statement. Never waits to be told what to do. So what we'd like you to do is just look at these 8 and weigh in on the 8 competencies, which would help in your organization a person to stand out as a high potential leader. Which one would you say would really make the biggest difference? And people ought to pay attention to this and stand out. I biased this a little bit because I said that communicates was the easiest. So
yeah,
and it's easy to do, but the one, Jack, is a high potential that you focused on was strategic perspective.
Yeah, I think we often think that what separates the most senior leaders from those in the middle is that they are more inclined to think strategically.
Yeah.
And so we'll see what the group thinks here.
Well, it's an interesting poll. What we have here is the highest votes, 16% goes, or 23% goes to inspires and motivates, which
That's interesting.
well,
Yeah.
it again, the lowest rated competency, highest importance, and then communicates at 16%, and
Yeah.
taking initiative got 10%, and that's an easy to do. They all got votes. Solve problems was only 4%.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing I did, and one of the things we wanted to talk about these 8, because as people think about improvement, there's a tendency to sort of think about, well, I could get a little bit better at that, a little bit better at that. Our early research, Jack, focused on what it happens to a leader when they're really good at something, when they have and so we wrote this book called The Extraordinary Leader, and they're extraordinary because they really stand out. They really differentiate themselves. So this graph shows you the impact of being great, being at the 90th percentile on these different competencies, these 8 different competencies. And so what we tested was, if you were at the 90th percentile on just one of these 8 skills, your average effectiveness rating goes from the 40th, if you have none at the 90th percentile, to the 75th, to the top quartile if you're really good at just one. If you're really good at just 2, 83rd percentile, and 3 to the 87th percentile. So what this shows you in our global data is that one strength gets you to the 64th percentile. So this is 11 percentile points better. And you just think about taking one of those 8 and making it great. And again, we have some research about how you can do that with the strengths builders. But if you're interested in finding out more about that, let us know, because we can give you some good insights into that. So let's see, Jack. One of the things we want to talk about is our research with 3 different organizations. And I said up front, when we talked about the high potentials were people in the top 5%, and I said we're a long ways away from that. So here's what we did. We went into these 3 organizations, we got a list of their high potentials, and we measured them, and we put them into quartiles: bottom 25%, next 25%, middle, and then the top 25%. And what you see here is, in these 3 organizations, these were all considered high potentials, but you can see in organization 1, 17% were in the bottom quartile, 34% were below the 50th percentile. They were the next 25. So as you look at this, organization 2, 13% in the bottom quartile. These are high potentials. But in organization 3, only 4.3% were in the bottom quartile. There was something different about organization 3. And what was the case in organization 3 is that in their 360, their manager received a copy of the feedback report that was generated for the participant. And so because that manager saw the 360 report, someone that they thought was, the greatest in the world, when they saw the feedback report, they said, oh, I guess I've missed something. So it really adjusted, and you can see that on every level, it adjusted that organization's ability to really identify who was really a high potential, because they saw the data. Now, this is a tough thing, and Jack will talk about this, because in a lot of organizations, we want, the only person that gets to see the report is the person themselves. And we like that. We think it works okay, but we also see the power of this data in informing people, others, about who really has that high potential. The other thing I'd like to say about this is I want to give a kind of a pitch for the late bloomers in life. Not everybody, graduates from college and is ready to become an executive. And not everybody, when they get their 360 feedback, gets high scores. But we do find that people grow and learn and develop over time. And that's why we really believe that development over time is really the thing that makes a huge difference. And to be aware of that late bloomer is really critical. And Jack, you've probably seen this in your experience too.
Yeah, so we want to pursue this topic about improving the selection of HIPOs. We've acknowledged and we've shown you data that right now for a lot of organizations, the selection process is pretty unreliable. We've said, and you've identified, that adding 360-degree feedback to that process would make it more predictive, make it more valid, make it more reliable. But the problem is that most organizations use their 360-degree feedback data only for development. So we wanted to explore that idea with you and toss out maybe 3 alternatives that we've seen used that you may want to just think about. The first one is we've seen organizations who share the results with only the participant's manager. So the participant gets a copy. Often the participant is asked to share their results with their manager, and maybe the manager then later on gets a hard copy of the participant's report. So that's one option. A second option is that the 360-degree feedback results are provided to the talent management group inside the organization. A very limited number of people, very qualified, able to keep confidences. That seems to be a very workable solution. A third option that we've seen organizations use is that they've had a totally separate, different assessment tool that's being used on a periodic basis that is shared more broadly. And the other one that has maybe a little more detail and covers some different areas is only given to the participant. So we toss these possibilities out to you only to say that you collectively seem to be of the opinion that, yeah, the selection process would be better if we could have the data shared with the manager or with the L&D group inside the company. And so we're offering you support in being willing to think more broadly and to think about, are there some other things that we can do? Let me just say a word or two about ensuring executive involvement. One of the keys that we know really helps all leadership development, and particularly is important for this high potential program, is that executives take it seriously and that they will schedule and participate in providing mentoring and coaching to these participants. You can keep executives informed by giving them periodic reports on the progress of this group. You can make it an agenda item in executive meetings. You can enlist the executive's help in identifying developmental work assignments, rotational assignments, special projects to be working on, SWAT teams, task forces, action learning projects. there's a number of ways that we can pull the senior executives into this development process with a high potential group, which would undoubtedly raise the level of satisfaction and have people perceive them as being more successful. Now, Joe did a fun thing. So Joe, I'll let you talk about this. You're looking at artificial intelligence to give you some suggestions about what are some new ideas and innovative approaches.
You know, it's fascinating, you know, if you ask AI and again, so when you ask AI, what could you do differently? Use AI, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a machine learning algorithm that will help you better identify high potentials. We don't know what that is. And to me, I scratch my head and say, well, if you don't really, you know, you need data and clearly if you input the 360 data in there, that would make it better. But I don't think you need AI to do that. But that was the first recommendation. The second one was to democratize development. And you know, this is great. I mean, we've found that having a process where you say everyone should develop. I mean, if you look at employee surveys and you say, what's the most negative common comment about that people don't like about their organizations? And it's the lack of development. People want to develop, they want to learn, they want to grow. And doing that really helps with engagement, but it also builds skills in your people. And why wouldn't you want that? Reverse mentoring is another thing you could do. Virtual reality training, crowdsourced challenges, that's interesting. Rotating HIPO status, external partnerships, gig style projects. These are all interesting things to think about. And I don't know if these will work, but that's the answer we got.
So in conclusion, we want to thank you for joining us. We would quote a Scottish writer and philosopher who said, the task of leadership is not to put greatness into people, but to elicit it, for the greatness is there already. And we think that is a nice way of capturing the role of the leadership development function in organizations. So it's my pleasure to pass the baton to Tracy and let her kind of wind things up for us. Thank you again, Tracy, for answering all the questions. I see you got quite a few of them during the webinar.
Yes, we did. And thank you to everyone for joining us. And thank you for all the questions and comments via chat. I learned a few things myself. Thanks also to Jack and Joe. Today, they shared insights and ideas how organizations can revolutionize and maximize the value of high potential development. We welcome the chance to learn what you're doing to develop your next generation of leaders and provide additional details about how we've supported high potential development. Feedback is a gift, and you can give that gift and/or indicate interest in speaking with us via the exit survey. The link is on the screen or in the chat. And at the completion of the survey, you'll be able to access our HBR article, Companies Are Bad at Identifying High Potential Employees. Thanks again for participating with us, and we will see you next month.